I worked at a fast food restaurant for 4 years from the ages of 20 to 24. And I've heard it said before that warehouse jobs are the dumping grounds for sub 5 losers. Well, whoever said that must have never worked in fast food because holy shit, fast food is just like, imagine if all the most retarded sub 5 drug addicted losers you've ever met were all gathered together in one place. And then on top of that, they're all being paid basically nothing, and they're forced to interact with the broader public, and all the customers obviously treat them like they're subhuman, because, they kind of are. And yeah, it's absolutely miserable. It is a sub 5 prison of misery. In my case, it felt like a prison because I just felt like I couldn't quit after I started because my parents were really happy with me that I finally got a job. And for me, I just felt like it's really, really hard interviewing for different jobs and everything, and just walking into places, asking for an application, interview, like the whole process. It was never easy for me. It's very difficult. Of course, obviously, things are different now, especially minimum wage jobs. You apply online. You don't really walk in and ask for an application and give them a firm handshake. But yeah, eventually, I just got comfortable at the job. I still always dreaded going into that place, but I just got used to it in the sense that I just didn't feel like it would be worth my time going out and trying to find something better when I already knew the most likely thing that would happen would just be I would end up walking into places and getting rejected, or, best case, well, actually, worst case scenario, I guess. I don't get rejected immediately, but I interview for a job and then I get rejected. I did start applying for internships eventually after I started college, but I think I only ever got one interview the entire time I was working at this Slop burger factory. And the only reason I even quit when I did was because I was moving to another state. So, I like physically couldn't work there anymore. But yeah, I don't know why I haven't talked about that job on here yet. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it a few times, but there was just so many things that happened there. Like this one 30-something-year-old man that worked there for like 2 weeks, then he just fucking hulked out and quit on the spot, cussing everybody out while he stormed out in the middle of the dinner rush for no reason. Like I still to this day, I don't even understand what he was mad about. It was just like, it was crazy. There was also like, it was a weird environment because, well, the first year I worked there, it was purely just sub 5s working there. And if anything, I was the top of the hierarchy at that point, as far as SMV goes, because I was at least still young. I was the youngest person there. And when I first started, I was, at that time in my life, not necessarily noticeably bald. And we had to wear hats on the job. So, the majority of people that saw me there, they didn't see me with my hat off. So even if I was slightly balding noticeably, which by the time I was, about to quit that job and move on, I was definitely noticeably bald at that point. Like I had given up by that point and just shaved my head. But yeah, when I first started there, it was just only sub 5s. And I was actually, if anything, the most high value man in the whole place. And that's not saying much. That's really not saying much. But yeah, then after about a year working there, we got a new general manager, and he immediately, like the very first thing he did, he hired this hot girl as a cashier. And she didn't work there very long, but this guy just kept hiring pretty much only younger girls at that point, and most of them were at least somewhat attractive. So the workforce started to be like 2/3 of the workforce was sub 5 balding drug addict, ex-con, mostly older guys too, like in their late 20s or 30s, and women. There was a lot of methed out sub-5 women there as well. But yeah, so like 2/3 of the workers were absolute human failures, just total sub-5s. Then the other third was all these young, peppy, attractive girls that were either still in high school or just recently graduated, just full of life, at the peak of their value as humans. I don't, believe it or not, I actually don't really see things that way. I don't judge a person's value purely based on their looks, including women. Okay, guys, I know some of y'all might feel that way. I don't personally feel that way, but I'm talking about the way society sees things, the way most people see things. A young, attractive female is at the peak of her value when she's young. But yeah, so it was like a really weird environment, a bunch of sub-5s rubbing shoulders with these hot young girls. Or they weren't like all hot. There was only a couple girls that worked there the entire time I was there that I would say were actually hot. But there was several that were kind of attractive, or maybe they just looked more attractive than they were because they were surrounded by the absolute dregs of society. But yeah, so the workforce, 2/3 of the workers were sub-5s, and the other third was all these young, fairly relatively attractive girls. And then there was me. I guess I kind of fit into the first group. Like I was kind of a sub-5 already at that point, but not really, not as much as a lot of the other people there. I was still young. I was in college making good grades. It wasn't totally over for me yet at that point. I still had hope. I was still in the early stages of where I was actually in denial about my hair loss. I mean, by the time I left that job when I was like 24, there was no denying it by that point. But when I was, in my first year or so there, I still had a lot of hope for the future. And I think I actually wasn't super ugly yet. So, I'm just saying this to say, in a way, I was kind of my own group at that place. I was kind of a bit of an outsider compared to everybody else. But man, there was just so many characters at this place. And there was some good dudes I met there too. Like not everyone there was like absolute human garbage or anything. I met some good people. And I actually kind of sort of felt like I almost had something going with this one girl that worked there for a little bit. To this day, I still can't tell if maybe that was just all in my head or not, because she did things sometimes where it felt like she was giving me signals, but I really don't know. I really don't know. I don't know. Obviously, nothing ever came of it. But yeah, we'll get into that eventually. But let me tell you about some of the characters I met at this place and some of the ridiculous goings-ons that happened while I was there. Okay, so I guess I'll do this in chronological order. So first, let me tell you about Stephen the Knife Cuck, or Stephen the ex-convict cuck. I don't know. I don't know what to call him. But yeah, so Stephen was the first shift leader I ever worked with there, and he was the one I would work with most often when I first started. And if you don't know, a shift leader is just like the lowest form of manager. They literally only made $1 more per hour than everyone else who was making minimum wage. But yeah, for the most part, Stephen was pretty cool. He was kind of annoying in some ways, but he wasn't bad at the job, and he didn't talk a whole lot, which was good. So I didn't mind working with him, but he was an ex-convict. I don't know what he was in for. I don't know what crime he committed, but he said this was basically his first job after getting out of prison. But by the time I started, he had already been working there for like 3 or 4 years. But I guess it was when he started, that was his first job after getting out the slammer, getting out the joint, whatever you want to call it. But I eventually found out that Stephen had some anger issues, and he had some other, probably bigger issues than that also. But we'll get into all that in a minute. So Stephen's wife also worked there. She was morbidly obese and racially ambiguous. Not that that really matters, but yeah, just trying to set the scene. So one day when I was at work, Stephen and his wife were both not there. They were both off work that day. And it was a slow night, like usual, because this place was really busy at breakfast time, I guess. But I only worked nights, so it was usually really slow whenever I worked, which was good, but it also made it really boring. But yeah, I was there. It was a slow night. And then Stephen just came charging into the kitchen on his off day, and he just walked straight back to the sink and he grabbed a big knife and he walked right back out. And I forget exactly how he said it, but basically while he was getting the knife, he was telling me that somebody tried to run his wife off the road or something. I don't really know the whole situation. I never asked about it. He never said anything else about it. But it sounded like, to me, what I think happened, he was just driving down the road, and then his wife called him and told him about some road rage incident or something that she had got involved in. So I guess Stephen figured he'd just stop by his place of employment to grab a knife real quick before he heads out to assist his wife. Because that's the only reason I can think why he would come to the restaurant where he works to arm himself with a knife instead of just bringing a knife from his house or something. I'm guessing he was already on the road when his wife called him. I don't really know, but that's the only thing that even starts to make sense. Personally, I would never even consider arming myself with a knife I don't really know what the situation was. I just know he said that some guy tried to run his wife off the road. But yeah, he obviously had anger issues, and it's kind of weird how territorial he was over his wife in that situation, because apparently he had no problem whatsoever with other men boinking her. So one day, when I was working the cash register, this guy I sort of knew from high school came in. He wasn't a student. He was actually like, I don't know if you'd call him a teacher, but he worked with the special needs kids. And he was also an assistant coach for the football team, I think. But yeah, I only knew him because I was a teacher's aide one year for a PE class, and this one special needs kid was in the class. So this guy would always be there too, because I guess he just went to whatever classes this certain kid went to. And he would talk to me a lot because I would pretty much just sit there on the bleachers for the whole class period. The coach never really asked me to do anything other than every now and then I'd have to go to the storage closet to grab a bag of dodgeballs or grab all the basketballs or something like that. But yeah, so this special ed aide assistant, I don't know what you would call it, this guy came in to the Slop factory, and I guess he had gone to high school with Stephen, or he knew him somehow. Actually, yeah, he definitely did go to high school with him, because when he came in, he asked me if Stephen still worked there, and I said, yeah, but he's off today. And the guy was like, man, you might want to stay away from that guy. So I was like, why? What's the deal? Then he said, like, and this isn't a direct quote, obviously. I don't remember exactly how he said it, but he was like, I used to hang out with Stephen back in high school, but I hadn't seen him in years. Then a couple months ago, he hits me up out of the blue, and we went out drinking. And then at the end of the night, we were all sitting in his truck, and his wife just turned to me, and she asked me if I wanted to make out with her. Then I looked over at Stephen, and he was just like, go for it. And he said he didn't do it. He just found the whole thing disgusting, which I agree. That is disgusting. That is morally reprehensible. That's not what a marriage is supposed to be like. You're supposed to only be with each other when you're married. You're not supposed to, even if both parties consent to it, which I don't truly believe it's ever the case that both parties consent to it, not truly. But even if that were the case, it's disgusting and it's wrong. But yeah, I wasn't really surprised when he told me that because Steven's wife was very flirtatious. She never flirted with me, but she would flirt with almost every guy that worked there. And she would flirt with random customers too. But I did notice she only acted like that when Steven wasn't there. But I guess he wouldn't have cared, apparently. Oh, and funny story about the special ed teacher guy. I remember I used to think he was cool back in high school because he would cuss all the time, which, as a teenager, I was like, whoa, that's cool. He's supposed to be a teacher or something, but he just doesn't give a fuck. So I thought he was pretty cool. But the thing I wanted to mention, so this guy was a special aid assistant or something like that, right? He worked with special needs kids anyways. Not like kids with Down syndrome, though. I think it was just like kids that were physically handicapped, like quadriplegics or whatever. But yeah, either way, he was some kind of special ed professional, but he would, like all the time, he would call things retarded. Like he would just be like, handball is retarded. That's not a real sport. Did you hear about the wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl? That shit was retarded. So, I don't know. I just thought that was kind of funny that the guy that worked as a special aid helper or whatever his job title was, I thought it was kind of funny that he would just use the R word like that all the time. But anyways, back to Steven the Knife Cuck. So yeah, that guy had told me that Steven was a cuck, basically. Although I don't think I knew that word at the time and he never used that word. But, that's basically the description of it. So I did believe him, because it's like, why would somebody make that up? But I was still kind of like, it was kind of, so mind-blowing to my naive mind at that point that I wasn't really sure. But it was eventually confirmed to me because, well, eventually this one 16-year-old kid started working at the Slop factory, and him and Steven got along really well. Steven would buy this kid cigarettes, and they would just hang out outside smoking all the time instead of working, which, they're getting paid basically nothing, and nobody treats anybody that works there with any respect in the first place. So I understand why they would choose to basically, not work while they're there. So I didn't really care. It made sense. But I guess they would also hang out outside of work too. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but Steven was like 26, I think, at the time. So I did think it was really weird they were hanging out. I was either 20 or 21 at the time. And I kind of felt like Steven was too old for me to hang out with. Not that he ever asked to hang out with me, but yeah, it's obviously kind of weird for a 26-year-old ex-convict to be hanging out with a 16-year-old and buying him cigarettes and everything. It doesn't seem like, that's, you shouldn't be doing that. And I think most people would agree with that. But yeah, I knew they hung out outside of work because they would be talking about things that happened when they were hanging out, and I would overhear them. But yeah, one day the 16-year-old came up to me and he was like, bro, I'm never hanging out with Steven again. So I asked him what happened, and he told me that Steven offered to pay him like $50 to boink his wife. And then when he said no, he offered him $100. So that was two separate people that told me how Steven's a cuck. So I'm pretty sure it's true. And, I don't care what people do in the privacy of their own bedrooms. But, at the very least, maybe they should stick to full-grown adults with whatever they're trying to do. Call me crazy, but I think this 16-year-old kid, you know, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. It's a pretty messed up situation. But yeah, then one final story involving Steven before I move on to our next character. So I was there for about a year, and Steven got transferred to a different store. So I never really saw him much after that. His wife still worked at the same store as me, so he would come in every now and then. But yeah, so around that time, this other ex-convict guy started working there. And this guy very much looked like an ex-con. Like, he had neck tattoos and full sleeves and everything. And apparently he had just got out. Like, he got out of prison and then he got this job within like 2 weeks. But he was a nice guy. He was nice to me. And he wasn't terrible at the job. So I didn't really have any problems with him. And I remember, I'm pretty sure he boinked the grossest, fattest, ugliest female manager in the whole store because he kept hitting on her one day and then he got her to agree to hang out with him after work. And I'm pretty sure they did it as like very disgusting, but I'm pretty sure it happened because the manager, like the gross female manager, she gave me $20 and she had me drive down the road to the liquor store to pick up a bottle of Fireball whiskey for them to drink after work, which I was fine with doing that because, I got to keep the change. So I made a little bit of money, and going to the liquor store was better than actually working at the slop factory. So, of course, it seemed like a good deal to me. And of course I milked it a little bit, I did sit in the liquor store parking lot for at least a few extra minutes. But yeah, the guy was definitely not as disgusting as the female manager was. But when you think about it, he did just get out of prison. So he was probably just desperate at that point. But then again, looking back, I'm pretty sure even now, I still wouldn't stoop that low because she was just really ugly. Call me a Volcel if you want, but she was very unattractive. And like I say, even at this point in my life, where I might as well have been in prison for the past 25 years with how non-existent my sex life is. So I don't know what was going through this guy's head. Probably just too much testosterone or something. Or maybe he was just really intoxicated because he was an alcoholic. He did eventually get fired for drinking on the job. But have you ever wondered what would happen when one overly aggressive ex-convict meets another overly aggressive ex-convict in a fast food slop factory kitchen? Because I found that out. So one day I was at work and it was just me and the alcoholic ex-con and the ugly female manager. And then Steven came in to get some supplies to take back to the store that he worked at, because sometimes the managers from one location would have to go to another location to get like a bag of burger buns or something, to get some kind of supplies. So that's what he was doing. So he went into the back where all the boxes of cups and everything was, and he saw this alcoholic ex-con guy, and I guess they had never met before that. The alcoholic guy didn't have his shirt tucked in, which was part of the uniform. You're supposed to tuck in your shirt. So Steven said to the guy, "Hey man, you need to tuck your shirt in. They will write you up for that." And the guy just said, "Okay." And then Steven left, and that was that. It was like a very nonchalant interaction. I didn't really think anything of it. But as soon as Steven walked out the door, this guy just got heated as fuck, like just so quick. And he was just like, "Who the fuck was that? Does he even work here? Who is he to tell me to tuck in my fucking shirt?" And he was just making such a big deal about it. And remember, in the moment when it happened, he didn't say anything. He was just like, okay. But as soon as Steven left, this guy's just going bananas, flying off the handle, acting like he just got deeply insulted or something. So the female manager, she was 1,000% on this alcoholic guy's side because she didn't even see the interaction like I did. So she probably just assumed that Steven was being a dick about it. But really, to me, it looked like he was just trying to let the guy know that he might get in trouble if he doesn't tuck his shirt in. Like, he didn't argue with him about it. He didn't press the issue. He just told him, hey, man, you need to tuck in your shirt. You're going to get written up for that if you don't. You know, it sounded like he was trying to help him out, if anything. But anyways, yeah, so the manager started to also get heated. And then she called our general manager. Like, she didn't even wait for like till the next day or till the next time she was working to talk to the general manager about it. She called the general manager on the phone while the GM was off work just to tell her about this situation. And I remember the alcoholic guy just kept being like, I bet he was just trying to show off in front of you. I bet he was just trying to show off. Which is pretty comical, honestly, because she was ugly as, like, I can't stress enough, this woman was very ugly and very fat. Although, you know, Steven's wife was also very unattractive, but not near as bad as this other lady. But yeah, I don't think Steven was trying to show off. Like, I'm pretty sure that was not the case. But yeah, from what I heard later, they actually got Steven permanently banned from ever stepping foot into our store again. And I'm pretty sure it's true because I never saw him again. So, you know, seems like it probably was true. But yeah, the alcoholic ex-convict, he got fired like 1 week after that because apparently he went to work so wasted that he could barely walk. I wasn't there when that happened. So, you know, I can't really verify, but that's what people told me. Okay, yeah, I think I might have to break this up into 2 or 3 separate videos because I got a lot more to talk about, and this is already probably like 30 minutes long. But I will go ahead and tell you about one of the NEETs I worked with, although technically he wasn't really a NEET because he did have a job, obviously, but he was basically a NEET. His name was Daryl. He was 28 years old, and he had been working there since he was like 22, I think he said. So he was a long hauler, but he had big ambitions of becoming a movie director because he talked about it all the time. But as far as I know, he literally never actually worked on that dream at all. Like, he would always talk about movies and the movie industry and about how much he wants to be a director, like how it's his life goal, it's his dream. But I asked him if he had a YouTube channel or anything, or if he had ever made anything, and he was just like, yeah, you know, I made a couple short films with my friends back in the day. But whenever I asked that, you know, he sounded really nervous. Like, he didn't really want to talk about it, and he would change the subject as quick as he could. But every now and then he would come up to me and he would just be like, man, I think I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to quit and I'm going to go back to school for filmography. You know, I just got to finally do it. I think I'm going to do it. You know, I can't be working here when I'm in my 30s, man. I've got this dream of becoming, I'm going to do it. I'm going to finally do it. And he would say all that, but he never quit. He did eventually get fired, but yeah, he never quit. But, you know, I liked Daryl. Maybe it was just because I kind of felt sorry for him in a way. Or maybe it was because I could see myself in him a lot. You know, maybe deep down I kind of knew, you know, Daryl is basically my future. You know, on some subconscious level, I probably did already realize that. But he was a nice guy, for the most part. He wasn't always a nice guy, but I'll get to that in just a minute. But the thing about Daryl was he talked a lot. Like, to the point he would actually prevent me from getting work done sometimes because he just wouldn't stop talking. He would even come into the restaurant all the time on his off days, and he would just stand at the counter trapping me in conversation. And it was always the most useless conversation, too. Like, he would just tell me all about specific episodes of Family Guy, or he would just give his opinions on whatever new video games were coming out. And he always did the thing where he would just reenact scenes from Family Guy or scenes from random movies. And it was just like, it was honestly just painstaking to sit there and watch this guy reenact a Family Guy scene for 45 seconds while I just sat there, trying to look like I'm actually entertained, because I never had the heart to tell him to stop. I was always just, and I still am to this day, very shy, very timid. I'm kind of a people pleaser, so he would trap me in these conversations and I'd just be nodding along while he's like, "You ever see the one where Stewie and Brian go to England?" And then he'd just quote lines from the episode while I just stand there pretending to laugh like a moron. And he didn't just quote Family Guy. Family Guy was his favorite show, I guess. I mean, he would also do this with random movies, a lot of times with movies that I've never seen. But Family Guy was like his go-to. And when I say he would reenact scenes from Family Guy, I mean, he was acting like he was being Quagmire. You know what I mean? Like he was physically acting with his body like he was fucking Peter Griffin. Not just quoting lines from Family. Like, it was the cringiest thing you could ever imagine. This 28-year-old man working in fast food, just trapping his coworkers, because he didn't just do this to, like, he would act like this to literally anybody. I don't know if it's a form of autism or what. Because also just like his general manner of speech and just how he was all the time, he basically acted like he was a lot younger than he was. He kind of acted like an immature 16-year-old. But yeah, I don't know. He was 28, I guess. Or I guess by the time he got fired, he was actually 30, probably. He was probably 30 or 31 by then. But yeah, I could never bring myself to tell him to just shut up, even though he was really annoying. But like I say, I felt bad for him or something, or maybe just because I could tell, in a way, I kind of related to him. Because I could tell, this is like the biggest loser I've ever met, but I might be a loser like that eventually. But yeah, the other weird thing about Daryl was that, there was a lot of late 20s, early 30s losers in that place. But the thing about Daryl was he didn't drink. He didn't do drugs at all. He didn't smoke. He was basically straight edge, but yet such a failure at life. So I don't know what his deal was. Probably some form of autism, if I had to guess. But like I say, I did like the guy. He was always nice to me, which is something I appreciate. But at the same time, I kind of hated working with him because I always worked in the front at first, like for my first year or so at the place. So basically I was the cashier / drive-through operator, and Daryl would work the kitchen, and he was extremely slow at the job. Like, you'd think after working there for 6 years or however long, you'd eventually get the process down pat, but I don't know, he just took forever. No matter how simple the order was, he took forever getting it out. The other thing about Daryl was that he would always complain whenever a customer made any modifications. Like, for example, if somebody asked for tomato on a burger that didn't usually come with tomato, he would act like it's just such a hassle, which I really don't understand. It takes like less than an extra second. You know, it's less than 1 second to put a couple slices of tomato on a burger. Like, yeah, I don't know. Because I did eventually move to mostly working in the back, you know, working in the kitchen, cooking the food. I did eventually start to do that. And sometimes modifications could be annoying if there was like a really big order with modifications on every single item. But even then, it wasn't really a big deal. It wasn't like that hard. I remember one time a customer asked us to cut their sandwich in half. Or, I mean, that actually happened quite a bit. Or it happened semi-frequently, I would say. You know, it wasn't uncommon. But it only happened once or twice when I was working with Daryl. But I just remember, you know, yeah, there was a button on the register for cutting a sandwich in half. So it was obviously something that was officially allowed by the restaurant because they programmed it into the ordering system. So there's just a button you can press on the modifications menu that makes it so on the screen that the cooks see in the back, it would say, you know, the name of the item, like whatever burger, and then it would say cut in half. You know, so there was a button for that. Okay, so it was something that the customers were well within their rights to request. Okay, and it's obviously not that difficult to cut a sandwich in half. You just pick up the knife and you cut the freaking sandwich in half. It's not like hard like diamond, you know, it's a burger patty, maybe some tomatoes and lettuce, and some bread. Very simple task. You know, it's about as easy a task as I can think of. But I just remember Daryl was so freaking mad about having to cut the burger in half. He was just like, he was shaking his head when he looked up at the screen, and then he was just like, okay, I guess I'll cut this in half. And then after I handed the order out, he comes up to me and he was just like, man, you just got to tell them we can't do that. That's not our job. They can cut their own sandwich in half. And I was just like, well, there's a button for it. So I'm pretty sure it is our job to cut it in half if that's what they want us to do. And he's just like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he just kept complaining about it. And another one I remember was one time a customer came in and she asked if we could put her burger in a box. Some of the smaller sandwiches at this place, we were just supposed to wrap them in paper. But the bigger sandwiches would go in these little boxes, you know, kind of our like premium sandwiches. So we would put them in a box that you could close up and it was like a nice little container. So this customer came in and she ordered a small burger that's usually just supposed to be wrapped up in paper. But she asked if we could put it in a box instead, which, you know, that one, there's not actually a button for that on the register. I don't know if we're actually not supposed to do that or what, but I just told her, you know, yeah, sure, we can do that. Because, I mean, it's obviously not a big deal. Or I didn't think it was a big deal. I figured it would not be a problem. It's not like it takes a lot of extra time to put a burger in a box instead of wrap it. It's actually easier to put the burger in the box compared to wrapping it in the paper. So I truly don't see what the problem was. So I told the customer, sure, we can do that. And then I asked Daryl if he could put the burger in a box. And he just looked at me like I'm fucking retarded or something. And he was like, this one just gets wrapped up. So I told him, yeah, I know that's what we usually do, but she asked if we can put it in a box. So then Daryl was like, okay, so tell her no. So I said, I already told her we would do it. And then he was just like, okay, I'm not going to do that, man. You can come back here and put it in a box if you really want to, but I'm not going to do that. So I was just like, okay. So I walked around to the back and I put the burger in a box. And the whole time, Daryl was just like, really, man? You're really going to do that? You can't just tell them no? And it's just like, I had already said we would do it. Like, I'm not going to turn around now and be like, actually, we're not going to do that. You know, it's much easier to just freaking do it. And also, you know, the customer was standing right there at the counter, probably watching all of this. I don't think she was able to hear what we were saying because all the machinery and stuff back in the kitchen was pretty loud, but she could see us. And yeah, but like I said, you know, I liked Daryl. Overall, I think he was a good guy, but he just made such a huge deal out of things that were very trivial, like things that I can't even begin to understand. Why he wouldn't just put the fucking burger in the damn box. But I guess maybe that's why he maxed out at fast food employee. Like maybe that's why that was the peak job that he was able to achieve by 28 years old. You know, obviously, I'm not that much better now at 37. I recently worked at a car wash for not much more than minimum wage. But, you know, when I was 28, I actually made good money. I was a freaking engineer, if you could believe it. So, you know, I at least, you know, I'm down at Daryl's level now, or even below it. But when I was his age at the time of this story I'm telling, when I was 28, my peak of employment was like much higher. But, you know, whatever, who cares? I'm no better than Daryl. I don't think I'm better than him, other than, you know, I don't try to reenact every scene from Family Guy to everybody that will be forced to be in the same room with me. That's a crazy thing to do. But like I say, I like Daryl, you know, I can relate to him in a lot of ways. But, you know, it's like, I guess he just, you know, maybe he just saw himself as the director of the freaking Burger Slop movie or something. Like, I don't know. He was just like very defiant. He didn't like being told what to do, but he was also very, not in a violent way, you know, not violent, not aggressive, but just in a very soft, complaining sort of defiance. I don't know, you know, he was a character. That's all I can say about that. But anyways, you know, it sounded like Daryl had a pretty nice, neat setup at his mom's house. He told me all about how they were renovating the garage for him, and they were even getting a bathroom put in for him. So, you know, he was basically going to have his own little apartment at his mom's house. And his mom even helped buy him a brand new car. You know, it was some kind of ugly little Chevy sedan. You know, it was very much an entry-level car, but he got a brand new car that he did use. I think he said his mom paid half, he paid half. You know, Daryl had it made. He actually had it made. Other than, you know, he was definitely an involuntary celibate, so similar to myself. But other than that, I would say he had it made. But the reason I know that he was an involuntary celibate, and I do know that for sure, you know, he didn't actually tell me that, but it was very obvious. He was probably about average looking in the face. He actually looked young for his age. When I first started working there, I actually thought he was my age or younger. So I thought he was like 20 or maybe even a teenager. But he was actually 28. But he just looked very young in the face. He was pretty short. I think it was about 5'6", 5'7", something like that. And obviously, you know, he was 28 years old working for minimum wage at a fast food restaurant. So that makes it pretty difficult to attract women. But the reason I know for a fact there is no way in hell my man Daryl ever got any action. So at some point, this one new girl started working there. She was ugly, but her and the ugly female manager I already mentioned, they were like best friends. I don't know if they knew each other before working at this place or if they just became friends there. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But they were really close friends. And they started this ongoing joke where the one girl would always try to give Daryl a hug whenever he got off work, because he would always work the shift before she got there, and then they would overlap for like 1 hour, and then she would take over for him, basically. And I guess they thought it was funny to try to give Daryl a hug, because at first he acted like he didn't want a hug, so she would like hug him and he wouldn't even hug back. I don't know, it's obviously kind of a weird situation. It's a weird thing they were doing, but if you were there, if you saw this going down, like, it was obvious to me they were making fun of him. And I think at first he did realize that, which is why he didn't want the hug, or he kind of seemed like he did want the hug, but he was skeptical about the whole situation, at least. But then after a few days of this happening, yeah, it's so brutal. Like, this is the thing, as annoying as Daryl was, it's things like when I saw this happen to him, it's just so brutal. It just, you can't help but feel sympathy for him. I honestly felt really bad for Daryl for this. So it's impossible for me to hate him. And little did I know just how much I would come to relate to the way that Daryl's life was. But yeah, one day when Daryl was about to leave, he clocked out, and then he walked back into the kind of break area in the kitchen to find this girl, and he approached her with his arms out, expecting a hug. I'm pretty sure he even said something like, "Okay, time for my hug." And this ugly sub-5 single mother, she like ran away from him and she was like, "Ooh, what are you doing?" And he was just like, "We always hug before I go." And she ran off to the little office where the ugly female manager was. And she was like laughing her ass off. And she was like, "Oh, he wants the hug. Oh, he wants the hug now. Oh, gross." And they were both just laughing their butts off. And Daryl was just like, "Okay." And then he just walked out. And I just watched all this go down. And, Daryl was very annoying at times. Most of the time, honestly. And he was bad at the job. Although I guess he wasn't really that bad. He was very slow with making the food, and he did complain a lot about very trivial things. But he didn't make a lot of mistakes. And that was actually the worst thing, when somebody would keep getting all the orders wrong, and then the customers would come back and want us to make it again. So at least he was pretty consistent on not making mistakes like that. So he wasn't actually horrible at the job. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is, Daryl did not deserve that. For all his faults, he was annoying, but he was a friendly guy to everybody that worked there. He was very nice to everybody when he wasn't complaining. Although, when he did complain, he wasn't really mean about it. Like I say, it was a very soft, passive sort of defiance that he had. But either way, he didn't deserve that. And, just the cherry on top, he was more attractive than those ugly cretins. The just sub-5. Both of these ugly women were single mothers, by the way. And they were both ugly and they were both gross. And Daryl was like not that ugly. Like, his face was probably about average looking. He was short. Yeah. He had a full head of hair. He had a really nice hairline for 28. I know by the time I was 28, it looked basically the same as it does now, which is bad. He had good skin. Facially, he looked younger than he was, probably because he never smoked. I'm pretty sure he had told me he never even took a sip of alcohol, so I don't know how his diet was. Probably not that great because he worked at this place. I'm assuming he ate the slop for lunch like the rest of us did because we got a discount. But, he was better looking than these wenches. And they made fun of him. They laughed at him. What a cruel thing to do to get him used to getting a hug. And then, she comes up to him every single day for like a whole week or 2 weeks, however long it was. I don't really remember. She was doing that to him on the daily, coming up to him, hugging him when he was even at first skeptical about it. And he was like, no, I don't really want to. And she just hugged him anyways. Right? And then the one day he finally is like, okay, I guess this is happening. He may have even only been doing it to like try to appease her. I don't really know what was going through his head. Or maybe he was like, this is my only chance at ever getting any action. Maybe he thought that maybe she liked him. I really don't know. But what a thing for them to do. What a cruel joke to get him in the habit of hugging this girl every day when he's about to leave. And then the one day when like she wasn't around when he clocked out, he goes back to find her because he thought she wanted the fucking hug. And he goes up to her to try to give her a hug, and she laughed at him. She said, ooh, he wants the hug, gross. She laughed. The other woman laughed, who was the manager. And she was actually like a salaried manager. She made like probably double what everyone else made, which was still not a lot of money, but she wasn't like even the lowest form of manager. She was actually supposedly a professional B-I-T, you can spell the rest of that yourself. But yeah, it's like both of these single mother floozy, they were fat, they had bad skin. Both of them had a lot in common with how ugly they were. And this was all before Tinder even existed, by the way. There was no dating apps at this point. Most people did not even have a smartphone, I'm pretty sure, at this point. There was some form of online dating. Plenty of fish existed. The social media did exist, but it was like, I don't even think Instagram existed yet. Maybe it did. I don't really remember. But it was like, the point I'm making is, I know some of you younger guys that you listen to my videos, y'all probably think that Tinder and online dating and social media is the entire reason why women these days have such an inflated sense of self-worth. But all that stuff, that only made the problem worse, okay? All women's inflated egos is a problem that has existed for quite some time, okay? Because even at the time this happened, when these fat, ugly broads played this cruel joke on my man Daryl, this was probably like 2010, I think, something like that. It was between 2009, 2011. I'm so fucking old at this point, I can't keep up. It was a long time ago. Damn near, Jesus Christ. In just a few years, I'll be able to say that was 20 years ago. That's crazy. It was like half my life ago. Okay, whatever. We don't have to talk about that, but just, these broads, just ugly skin, ugly body shape, fat, ugly facial features, hoes. They were, even back then, before smartphones, before smartphones were like ubiquitous, before these dating apps, Tinder and Hinge and everything was ubiquitous, before all that, they were clowning on this guy My man, Daryl, who is just a sweetheart, very nice guy, they were clowning on him when they weren't even his looks match. Like he was, I would say he was 2 points above these B words. They were beneath him in the hierarchy, you know, or that's how it should have been. But whatever. Daryl eventually got fired whenever we got a new general manager. And then a couple months after that, the new general manager got fired for some kind of embezzlement or something. I'm not really sure what it was exactly, but maybe that was actually just a rumor and he wasn't stealing from the company, but that's what everybody said. So I don't really know. But yeah, then the old general manager came back and she tried to get Daryl to come back, but he refused. You know, Daryl got fired and we never got him back. And good for him. I hope that Daryl is still living it up in his converted garage goon cave at his mom's house, just daydreaming about being the next Quentin Tarantino. You know, I hope actually that he gave it a shot and he at least started a YouTube channel. Maybe one of these slop, faceless YouTube channels out there these days that makes absolute garbage content but gets millions of views. Maybe Daryl's behind one of those channels. I hope so. I hope so. He deserves it for what he's been through. Actually, he doesn't. You know, he would complain about cutting a sandwich in half. That's absolutely fucking ridiculous. But whatever. I think I got to stop there for now. This is probably going to have to be 3 parts, maybe. At least 2 parts, because I still haven't even talked about the girl that maybe I had a chance with back then. And there's also the other NEET that I worked with who was, you know, this other guy was really more of a true classic style NEET. He was more so a NEET than Daryl was. And I didn't get to talk about this paranoid schizophrenic female manager. I didn't get to talk about the guy that injected some kind of shit to try to get a better tan. I think it's called Milana tan, if any of you remember that stuff. Because I swear, this place was just like the Sub-5 headquarters or something. And you know, the funny thing is, I just never realized at the time, I actually did belong there. I belonged at the Sub-5 Slop headquarters. Of course I belonged there. But I still had hope at that time, and I was young. I was a young, virile man, whatever that word is. Okay, guys, I got to stop. I'm tired. I'm sitting in my car right now, uncranked, okay, no heat or anything. I think it's like 15 degrees out here right now. I'm wearing like 2 jackets. I'm wearing gloves. I'm wearing 2 toboggans. I got a blanket. And I'm just wearing my Crocs and my feet are cold as shit. And I got to stop this, okay? This is as much as I can do right now. I'm really rambling, but yeah, I'll try to get part 2 up soon. Thanks for watching.